I think the majority of American people are in touch with human suffering and human empathy. The problem is the political system that does not now work to serve the will of the people. And the only way to override this is with a revolution at the ballot box, because otherwise the system is locked up by everything that you've described here. I wrote a book and Oprah Winfrey liked it. You can't, that is, and she opened the world for me. So what that meant is I had access. Now, once I had that access, yes, I've worked very hard. I have worked very hard. And I think just as you've worked very hard, and everybody listening right now, I mean, we understand that. You have to, even if you're given opportunity, but you can't overstay what it means. And I think what I got from the Oprah experience, just as I got old enough to look back at my parents, old enough to look back at the fact that I went to decent public schools, old enough to look back and to realize what it means that there were good public libraries, old enough to look back and realize that when I was growing up, there was the minimum level of economic opportunity. I think what I've learned is that I got help. I've worked hard and I got help. And we don't give enough people. Martin Luther King said, if they give it to the poor, they call it a handout. If they give it to the rich, they call it a subsidy. You mentioned earlier, you articulated beautifully, you're rich, we got a handle. But if there are too many people locked out who have just as much entrepreneurial spirit as I've had, who want to work as hard as but people are locked out, and that's unsustainable. And that's what I've learned from my experience, is that I got help and I worked hard, but you can't leave out that I got help. And I want a society in which enough people are given the minimum help, particularly as children, that then it's reasonable to talk about them being accountable for their own circumstances because they had a shot at it. And to me, that's the American dream. The American dream is not that you can make it or I can make it or Barbara can make it or anybody else we know can make it. It's that we are responsible for a sacred trust, this sacred trust that there would be a possibility within a society of a place where anybody, if they worked hard enough, had a shot at it.
I mean, it's beautifully stated, and we are in a total agreement, because even my very rich friends who seem either ignorant or knowingly ignorant, willfully ignorant, or just uninterested, there is a level of the starting blocks now are so ridiculously unequal. The public school that I attended is still quite a good public school system, but frankly, it's in an affluent community. My dad was the crane operator out here on Long Island in a very affluent community. And so if you tell me the zip code of the kid, I can tell you whether or not they're getting a good public school education, right?
Absolutely.
But you and I both know that all of this is very uneven and very unfair, and we don't choose our parents. And so therefore, the country is rich enough where we could create a platform of equal opportunity for people, where there could be a package of things we provide to our citizens, whether it's healthcare or quality education, K through 12, so that they can at least get to the starting line. So
exactly.
So why the callous indifference, though? You're a very empathic person. I've read several of your books, Return to Love, the book on miracles that you wrote. Why have we grown callous? Why, if I make that a conversation piece with somebody at a 𝗙𝗵𝗁𝗀𝗀 cocktail party, they groan and roll their eyes and tell me, yeah, well, that's not going to happen, and why, if we're not careful, Marianne, we're going to be living, the wealthy at least are going to be living in these barbed-wired security compounds.
Absolutely
like
correct.
we do
With
in
bodyguards, even to go to the grocery store. You're absolutely correct.
Correct.
All right,
so why are we why don't we want to help our neighbor like we did 100 plus years ago, where Henry Ford, bad guy, I mean, obviously a racist and so forth, but he was like, you know what, I'm going to pay these workers enough money so that they can afford the car they're making, and I'm going to put them in a house, and they're going to have a good public school. This way they don't come after me with a tiki torch and a pitchfork while I'm trying to have my caviar in my mansion. How do we lose sight of that?
Okay, so what we lost sight of was the power of democracy. So let's talk about this for a minute. Jefferson said that the only safe repository for power in this country is in the hands of the people. I believe that the majority of American people would agree with what you and I were saying. So when you say, how did we, everything you described was the people at those fancy cocktail parties. I'm sorry. Not every rich person is a greedy bastard. But the group of people that you're talking about who have lost so much empathy, who are living in this bubble that emotionally buffers them from the suffering that is so endemic in this society today, they should not be in control to the extent to which they are controlled. In control, that is what an oligarchy is. I believe that the majority of American people would agree with everything you and I have said. The American people are not the problem. We are a decent people. The majority of American people want our kids to go to decent schools where they're not worried about getting shot at school, where there's not carcinogens in our food and forever chemicals in our water and pesticides in our food and all the things that you've described. The problem is we have a sclerotic political system that is sitting on top of the will of the people, so that the will of the people is being suppressed. And instead, the will of the people at the cocktail parties you're talking about is holding sway because of the money that their undue financial influence. How they lost the plot, there's somebody told me the other day, there's this term, have you heard this term, ethical fading? It's interesting. It's when people either they get too powerful or they get too much money or there's too much concentration on stockholder value or whatever it is in somebody's life, and they start making an ethical compromise. And it's usually not a big ethical compromise. It's a little ethical compromise, and it's just ethical fading until you've got a situation where nobody's just saying, hey, wait a minute, we can't do this. It could hurt a child. But I go back to what I said before, and I think this is so important. I think the majority of American people are in touch with human suffering and human empathy. The problem is the political system that does not now work to serve the will of the people. And the only way to override this is with a revolution at the ballot box, because otherwise the system is locked up by everything that you've described here.